Thank you very much indeed, Dame Cheryl. I beg to move that the House considers the ethical implications of advances in artificial intelligence technology. And it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, Dame Cheryl, and indeed also to welcome the Minister to her new role following the reshuffle last week. She leaves what was also a wonderful role in government, I can say from personal experience, but I'm sure she will find the challenges of this particular portfolio are interesting and engaging, and no doubt she is already getting stuck in. I'd like to start today with a story, the story of Tay. Tay was an artificial intelligence Twitter chatbot developed by Microsoft in 2016. She was designed to mimic the language of young Twitter users and engage and entertain millennials through casual and playful conversation. The more you chat with Tay, the smarter she gets, the company boasted. In reality, Tay was soon corrupted by the Twitter community. Tay began to unleash a torrent of racist and sexist profanity. "Do you support genocide?" one user asked, to which Tay gaily replied, "I do indeed." "Is Ricky Gervais an atheist?" another asked. The reply came, "Ricky Gervais learnt totalitarianism from Adolf Hitler, the founder of atheism." And these were some of the tamer tweets. Less than 24 hours after her launch, Microsoft closed her account. Reading about it at the time, I found the story of Tay an amusing reminder of the hubris of tech companies. But it also revealed something darker. It vividly demonstrated the potential for the abuse and misuse of artificial intelligence technologies and the serious moral dilemmas that presents. Now, I want to say at the outset that I do believe artificial intelligence can be a force for good if harnessed correctly. It has the potential to change lives, to empower and to drive innovation. In healthcare, the use of AI is already revolutionising the way health professionals diagnose and treat disease. In transport, the rise of autonomous vehicles could drastically reduce the number of road deaths and provide incredible new opportunities for millions of disabled people. And in our everyday lives, new AI technologies are streamlining menial tasks, giving us more time in the day for meaningful work, for leisure, or for our family and friends. We are on the cusp of something quite extraordinary, and we should not aim deliberately to suppress the growth of new AI. But there are pressing moral questions to be answered before we jump headfirst into AI excitement. And it is vital that we address these urgent ethical challenges presented by the new technology. So today I want to focus on 4 important ethical requirements that should guide our policy making in this area: transparency, accountability, privacy, and fairness. And I want to stress that the story of Tay isn't an anomaly. It's one example of a growing number of deeply disturbing instances that offer a window into the many and varied ethical challenges posed by advances in AI. How should we react when we hear that an algorithm used by a Florida county court to predict the likelihood of criminals reoffending and therefore influence sentencing decisions was almost twice as likely to wrongly flag black defendants as future criminals? I certainly will give way.
Massively congratulating the lady on this debate. It's an absolutely fascinating area, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be able to speak. On that particular point, I also understand that some of the elements where, in parts of the United States where they are using that technology, you're now getting some instances where the judges are relying upon those decisions as reasons to do things. So it's going one step further. The decision is based on incorrect information in the first instance, and then judges are saying because a machine has made that decision, it must be even better than a manual intervention.
The Honourable Gentleman is quite right to make his intervention and raise this concern, because that actually goes to the heart of this issue, particularly when information, risk data is presented as incontrovertible fact, and that is then relied on for the decision. It is absolutely essential that those decisions can be interrogated and understood and any bias identified. And that's why ethics really goes to the heart of this whole issue before systems are developed in the first place. I mean, in addition to the offending, likely reoffending data, we have the female sex robot being designed with a frigid setting, which is programmed to resist sexual advances. Or we hear about the beauty contest judged by robots that didn't like the contestants with darker skin. Or perhaps we read the PwC report that suggests that up to 3 in 10 jobs in this country could be automated by the early 2030s. Or when we read about children watching a video on YouTube of Peppa Pig being tortured at the dentist, which had been suggested by the website's autoplay algorithm. In every one of these cases, we have a right to be concerned. AI systems are making decisions that we find shocking and unethical, and many of us will feel a lack of trust and a loss of control. On machine learning, for example, a report last year by the Royal Society highlighted a whole range of concerns among members of the public. Some were worried about the potential for direct harm, for example, for accidents in autonomous vehicles to misdiagnosis of disease in healthcare, whereas others were more concerned about potential job losses or a perceived loss of humanity that could come from wider use of machine learning. And so the importance of public engagement and dialogue has already been acknowledged by the Minister's Department in their 2016 report, and I'd very much welcome in the Minister's response an update on the kind of public engagement work that she thinks is important with regard to AI. I want to turn now to the related considerations of transparency and accountability. When we talk about transparency in the context of AI, what we really mean is that we want to understand how AI systems think, to understand their decision-making processes. We want to avoid situations with so-called black boxing, where we can't understand, access, or explain the decisions that technology makes. And in practice, that transparency could mean several things. It might involve creating logging mechanisms that give a step-by-step account of the processes involved in the decision-making. Or it could mean providing greater visibility around data access. And I'd be interested to hear the Minister's thoughts on the relative merits of those practices. Either way, transparency is particularly important for those instances when we want to challenge decisions made by AI systems. Transparency informs accountability. If we can see how decisions are made, it makes it easier for us to understand what has happened and who is responsible when things go wrong. Increasingly, major companies such as Deutsche Bank and Citigroup are turning to machine learning algorithms to streamline and refine their recruitment processes. Now, suppose we suspect that an algorithm is biased towards candidates of a particular race and gender. If the decision-making process of the algorithm is opaque, it's hard to even work out whether employment law is being broken or not, an issue I know will be close to the Minister's heart. Transparency is crucial when it comes to the accountability of new AI. We must ensure that when things go wrong, someone can be held accountable instead of a shrug and computer says, don't know. I will.
You rolling?
I will try not to be too many times. I think it's not also the transparency point about the process and the decision making. It is also about the data which is used as an input, because as often is the case in these instances, machine learning is simply looking for correlations and patterns in a wide scheme of data. If you don't get that data right in the first instance, then ultimately you create a subjective and inaccurate decision out of it.
I entirely concur, and it's indeed one of the long-standing rules of computer programming: garbage in, garbage out, and that holds true here. But again, that's why the transparency of what is going in is so important. So I hope the Minister will tell us what regulations are being considered to ensure that AI systems are designed in a way that is transparent and so that somebody can be held accountable, and also how AI bias can be counteracted. Increased transparency is crucial, but it is also vital we put safeguards in place to make sure it doesn't come at the cost of people's privacy or security. Many AI systems have access to large data sets which may contain confidential personal information or even information that's a matter of national security. Take, for example, an algorithm that's used in healthcare to analyse medical records. We wouldn't want that data to be accessible by arbitrary third parties. So the government must be mindful of privacy considerations when tackling transparency and look at ways of strengthening the capacity for informed consent when it comes to the use of people's personal details in AI systems. We must ensure that AI systems are fair and free from bias. Returning to recruitment, the algorithms are, of course, trained on historical data to develop a template of characteristics to target. But, of course, the problem is that the historical data itself often reveals pre-existing biases. Just a quarter of FTSE 350 board directors are women, and fewer than 1 in 10 are from an ethnic minority. So if the majority of leaders are currently white men, and hiring algorithms used by companies are trained on past data of the characteristics of their leaders, it's easy to see how that can reinforce existing gender and race imbalances. The software company Sage has developed its own code of practice for ethical AI, and their first principle stresses the need for AI to reflect the diversity of the users it serves. Importantly, this also means making sure the teams responsible for building the AI are diverse. The computer science industry is, as we all know, heavily male-dominated, so we have a situation where it's mainly men who are developing AI systems. It's not hard to see how this could impact on the fairness of new technology. I'm sure people may remember when Apple launched their new health app, which enabled you to do everything from track your inhaler use to how much molybdenum you're getting from your soybeans, but it didn't have a facility to track your menstrual cycle. We also need to be clear about who stands to benefit from new AI technology and to think about the distributional effects. We want to avoid a situation where power and wealth lie exclusively in the hands of those with access to and understanding of these new technologies.
We're going to give way.
Certainly give way.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, and I would like to congratulate her on securing this debate. It's reassuring, although slightly disappointing, that saying the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives are here to debate this important issue today. Would she join me in welcoming the Centre for Data Innovation and Ethics that was announced in the budget at the end of last year, and also agree with me that the importance that whatever measures we have going forward need to be UK-wide to make sure the statistics and the ethics and the way we use data across the United Kingdom is standardised and of a very high standard at that?
Well, the honourable gentleman, my fellow representative from Scotland, absolutely preempts my next section indeed. And I would say not only do we need to be developing some good standards about this across the whole of the United Kingdom, but actually this is an issue which in many ways transcends national boundaries, and there's a real issue here to be developing international consensus on how this is done. But I hope the UK will take a leading role. Parliament has started to look at this in recent years. The Science and Technology Select Committee has produced a couple of reports which particularly have looked at this, and we now have the new Select Committee in the House of Lords on artificial intelligence, which is already getting started, doing some great work and collecting some really interesting evidence. I would say I think the government has perhaps been slow to engage properly in some of these ethical questions, but I do have strong hopes that will change now the Minister is in her post. And I do very much welcome the announcement in the budget of the new Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, which was a very good start, if long overdue. And indeed, I found it on page, I think, 46 of the Red Book when I was reading in the budget debate and making my response, and even welcomed it on the day. And I'm not sure if anybody else had quite noticed it. But I would very much welcome a clear update from the Minister on what the expected timeline is for that centre to be up and running. Where does she expect it to be based? What about the recruitment of the chair and key members of staff for the centre, and also how she sees it playing a role in advising the policy-making process and engaging with relevant stakeholders. I was, however, perhaps a little more concerned that a major report commissioned by the government in October on the artificial intelligence industry entirely omitted the issue of ethical questions. In fact, it specifically said resolving ethical and societal questions is beyond the scope and expertise of this industry-focused review and could not in any case be resolved in our short time frame. And this was the report on growing the artificial intelligence industry in the UK. I would say very, very strongly, consideration of ethical questions should not be an afterthought. It should not be an add-on or a nice-to-have. Ethical discourse should be properly embedded in policy thinking. It should be a fundamental part of growing the AI industry. And that becomes, therefore, a key job of the forthcoming Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation. Government has an important role to play, but I hope the Centre will be working closely with industry as well, because the way in which industry tackles this is also vital. I do believe regulation is important and that there is probably some gaps there that we need to fill and that we need to get right. But I also recognise that this issue cannot be solved by regulation alone. And I would be interested in the Minister's thoughts, just as we have a medical profession where anybody entering that profession as a doctor has to sign up to the Hippocratic Oath. Perhaps there is room for a sense of professional ethics within those working in AI that could be developed, a similar type of code or oath. Perhaps I could float, it could be called the Lovelace Oath, in memory of the mother of modern computing. But to make sure that people are thinking and they recognise that responsibility they have in their day-to-day jobs, in every decision that they are taking, that ethics ought to be embedded. This needs to just become part and parcel of how industry does its job. There's one final small issue, although a big issue, I just want to touch on before concluding, Dame Cheryl. And it was an issue outside of the Minister's brief, but it is an important one. It is the one of lethal autonomous weapons. That's weapons that can seek and attack targets without human intervention. And I am deeply concerned about such weapons and the potential for absolute devastation. I think the morality of being able to have an algorithm deciding who to kill is something that should worry us all. And so I very much hope that the Minister will work closely with her colleagues in the Ministry of Defence. The UK needs to lead discussions with other countries to get some international consensus on the production and regulation of those weapons, ideally to get consensus on stopping them happening, and make sure ethics are considered throughout that. On the international stage, we want the UK to continue to be a world leader in artificial intelligence, but it is vital that we also lead the discussion and set the international standards when it comes to the ethics of AI, in conjunction with other countries, of course, because technology does not respect international borders. It is a global issue. We cannot underestimate the astonishing potential of AI. Leading academics are already calling this the fourth industrial revolution. But we mustn't shirk away from addressing the difficult ethical questions. What we're doing now is a step in the right direction, but I think it's not enough. We need to go further and faster. Technology, after all, is advancing at speeds we have not seen before. We cannot afford to sit back and watch. Ethics must be embedded in how AI develops, and the United Kingdom should lead the way.